Hey, what's up? I am Cylic, and welcome back to Etheria Restart. In today's video, I wanted to go over how to decide which threshold boss you should farm for your account. Now, for this, there are two main factors that decide which one or ones is best for you. First being what your goal in the game is, and second, simply being what characters you have, since the goal you have in the game will determine what gear would be most relevant for your account, and the characters you have will heavily impact how easily you will be able to clear certain fights. With this in mind, I think it makes the most sense to decide what ones you should be focusing on with the combinations of these two reasons. So yeah, let's get right into the video on how to decide with a helpful infographic I made. Okay, so here's the infographic. Pretty simple, there's 4 pages to it, and each one is about a different part of this. So the first one is just about what your goal in the game is and how to apply that to what you should farm. Before I get into this, I want to preface it with the fact that these are all the general guidelines based on goals. This is not just if you are focusing on this, do this. That is not what I'm saying. This is just a general helpful recommendation based on the content that would help you the most. That's all it is. So the 3 goals I have written here are just generic ones. There could be more, but this is just what I thought of. And we got PvP, PvE, and then just general progression, meaning someone that really wants to focus PvP is their main priority. PvE would be someone where they're not interested in doing PvP and they just want to prioritize PvE. And then general progression being you want to do both to a certain extent, just being able to progress through all parts of the game as well as you can. So first for PvP, I would recommend as a goal for this, it makes the most sense to prioritizing Doki Doki and then transitioning into Aurora. And this is because the number one factor to your success in PvP is always going to be speed. It is always speed. If you outspeed your opponent, you are like 9 times more likely to win. If you outspeed your opponent, you probably win the match. That is generally how it is. But you also want sets from Aurora. The sets from Aurora will make that big difference after outspeeding. Because sets from Aurora have like immunity and stuff that can even counter speed. But Doki Doki, I would still argue, is more important for PvP. But definitely Doki Doki first, and then Aurora would be next priority as a person that wants to focus on PvP. But next up would be PvE. So for someone that's prioritizing PvE over everything else, I would still say Doki first, but that's purely because even in PvE, speed is still the most important thing, I would say. But the other two are both very good depending on what units you're using. So I would say if you're playing units like a Tiamat that really wants the HP set plus speed, I would do Terramaton plus Doki. But if you're playing characters like Rosa that want momentum plus Fury, you want to do Aurora as your secondary one. But I would recommend prioritizing 2 different ones for this. You do Doki first, and then go into the other 2. Unless you're somehow playing a team that doesn't need speed as much for PvE. I don't know if that exists. I've never heard of one, but it might. If that's the case, then just do whatever is more useful for your best sets. Pretty much for PvE, you just do whatever is your best sets for your characters. That's your prioritize. That's literally it. And then for general progression is a little bit different. This is what I'm doing, and I think it is, in my opinion, the most enjoyable way to play the game. And it's just be able to clear them all, but be able to have a priority list of what is higher priority for your characters in your account. This is heavily based on the units you are using and what you want to do in the game. This is just like someone that wants to be able to PvP, wants to be able to PvE. You're just going to need to have a lot of units built if you're doing this, because it's different characters needed for both. So I think it makes the most sense to be able to do them all, even if it makes you slightly worse at them individually. It's pretty easy to have one team that you just change 1 or 2 characters that can do all 3. Like, that's what I'm doing. Granted, I have some pretty good characters, so it's a lot easier, but still, you can just have a team where you have, like, let's say, like 8 characters, and though, like, a certain combination of that will always be able to clear all 3 thresholds. And that's what this is saying. Like, you have a priority list of those 3, and you use those 8 characters and certain combinations, and that will always be able to beat all 3 thresholds. But those are the 3 goals I have in mind. Next up, I want to go over specific characters for each different threshold and what they're best at, because this is also a good big factor in what you'll be able to farm, since if you don't have the characters that are good for it, you can't even farm it, so it's not really even an option, you know? And before I get into this one, I want to preface, I don't mean you cannot farm this stage if you don't have this character for each slot. This is just the best ones, and it may be beneficial to choose a different one if you have characters in that category, not the other. That's all it is. It does not end all be all by any means. But first, let's start with Doki Doki. In Doki Doki, the best unit by far for DPS, we're starting with DPS units, is Romoka. Not even close. Most people know this. Romoka's insane. She just does crazy damage in Doki. She is definitely the best for Doki. If you have her, well, if you have her built, you pretty much have to farm Doki. Like, there's no other place you really want to be using her other than maybe PvP. But if you have her and are thinking about which one to farm, that's definitely a good inclination. You don't have to do Doki, but it makes it a lot easier. And then these other three characters, I would argue, are on pretty similar level. Tiamat, Shiada, and Rosa. All three are good. Probably Tiamat and Shiada are a little bit better, but all three of these characters work for Doki Doki and do it well. Tiamat's more of like a safer sustainer option that does less damage. Tiamat, granted, I would argue is probably not worth running if you don't have Lily. Her damage is just going to be pretty bad. You'll be just as safe, but your runs are going to be really slow without a Lily. Shiada's really good. You just run all buffer units, you max her out, you spam go 3, very nice. Rose is also very nice. The only issue is she just does more single target damage. So she kind of struggles with the whole AoE nature of Doki Doki, but she still just does so much damage and can trigger off of everyone, especially if you have a bunch of skill ups into her. So she's still good. Next up, we have Terramaton. For Terramaton, I currently have Dieting, Shadow Sonya, Lead, and Claros in here. All of these characters are great. The best two, I would argue, are Dieting and Shadow Sonya, but Shadow Sonya is only great if you also have a Fangus and Opal built, or at least one of the two. Because Shadow Sonya is the dot character, you play with the dot units, that's the only way that team works. If you don't use at least one of those two, she's worthless. But she's very good, does a bunch of damage. It's pretty much the only threshold she can be used on currently, so if you ever build a new item from threshold, you probably can only do Terramaton realistically. And then Dieting is just great single target damage, very nice, does a ton of damage, and I mean that's really it. You buff them up like crazy, big single target damage. Lean is good still, but I would personally still recommend everyone to just reset her, because you'll probably have another DPS unit, unless you don't have other DPS units of other elements. I would just definitely recommend resetting her after you do the first Animus Fate. Other units are just generally better. Like Dieting is just, in my opinion, always better than her pretty much. He's more generic. He's not AoE technically, but I just think he's better in general. But she is good for Terramaton. If you ever build it and you like using her, you can totally use her for Terramaton. Claros, also great for Terramaton, although he is quite niche. So I can totally get if you have him and don't want to build him for this, but I also wouldn't recommend selecting him, but he is really good. For specifically Terror and Union bosses. He's the best Union boss DPS of the game, and he's good in Terror. He does like, he scales with people that multi-hit, so you have a bunch of teammates that multi-hit, he's quite good in that. And then lastly, we got Aurora. We got Rosa and Dieting here. I already talked about both of them. Rosa's absolutely insane here, best character for Aurora for sure, because she doesn't have any limitations here. She's elemental advantage. She has the most single target damage in the game sustained other than Claros. So her in this context is amazing. She's insane in Aurora. As long as you have a Dispeller on your team, just use her. That's very strong. These are the two best units for Aurora. If you don't have either of them, it's going to be a lot harder to clear Aurora, but you still can't. As long as you can't, these are just, if you have these units, you're going to have a lot easier time clearing Aurora. Next up, I want to talk about supports and debuffers. Now, it's very different from the other list. Since the majority of supporters and debuffers can be used in at least 2 of the 3 threshold modes, the way I did this was I did this little sort of like a graph. The farther the left a unit is, the more generically good they are, and the farther right they are, the more specifically good they are. Them being higher or lower is irrelevant. It's not trying to say like the higher ones are better or anything like that. It's just left is more generic, right is more specific. And so the way I want to explain this is pretty much just, since all supporters in Debuffers can be used in almost anywhere, I want to go over each unit very briefly, say what they're good at, and if you have them, what would be like the best cases to use them. And of course, units that are more generic are, generally speaking, more useful for your account, because if you build all the generic units, you can just play one team in all content, which is a lot better. But first, let's talk about Lily. I mean, in my opinion, I would argue best character in the whole game. She is good with every DPS in the whole game. No one doesn't want her. More turn meter and everything. She's insane. Most generic too. She can be used in literally everything. So absolutely broken. Very good unit. Used everywhere. Doki Doki, somewhat similar. She can be used everywhere, but she's just not nearly as impactful as Lily. But she's still over here because she's not necessarily strong as Lily, but she's just as generic. She'll be used in pretty much any team, everywhere, because again, she's LD and everyone wants her buffs. Similarly, we got Heinrich. Again, LD units are in general very generic to be used pretty much anywhere. He is also very good. He's a debuffer, and the nice thing about him, he has very specific good use for Terramaton and Aurora, since he can dispel really consistent on his S2, which is really, really nice because most of the dispel units are really annoying. There's not that many of them. So if you have him, he's amazing for those two places. Next up, we got Bayotin, another very, very generic support. She's like the only one of the RGB units that can be used even on an elemental disadvantage and still be viable. But I would still recommend probably not using her elemental disadvantage, but it is still good because she's a reason unit. So she's not as great in Doki Doki, but she can still work great in Terramaton and Aurora though. Very, very good in those content. We got Kloss, very good in generic debuffer, absolutely insane in the places where she is elemental neutral or advantaged. As long as it's not, yeah, she's absolutely insane everywhere but Aurora. Like, she is definitely the best debuffer other than maybe Heinrich or some other similar things for Doki Doki and Terror. Very, very strong, crazy damage, imp, and stuff like that. Freya, great attack buff, great terminal manipulation. She pretty much just upgraded Chiaki. Only downside, she can't be used in Aurora because elemental disadvantage, she would get one shot. But otherwise, great. Like, if you have her, totally use her. She is amazing. Chiaki is just like slightly worse Freya. Very similar attack buffer with terminal manipulation, but just does less. She doesn't have the defense buff or healing from Nightmare, but she technically has a more consistent attack buff, but she has worse terminal manipulation and no defensive utility. Then we have Marvel, which I'm a little torn on. Marvel was amazing until you realize that Terramaton cannot or has reduced terminal manipulation at Hell difficulty and higher. So before Hell, he feels insane because the Terramaton just takes no turns, and then you get to Hell and his effect is reduced by 60%, which is very annoying. It makes him fall off really hard. So I would say he's only really worth using now. I mean, he's decent everywhere, but he's really only great for Doki Doki now. So cool unit, and he is generic. He's just not nearly as strong as, like, let's say, like a Lily is way more impactful to your team than a Marvel at this point for the threshold. For generic PvE, I still think he's amazing because pretty much nothing has that turn meter reduction. So he's still really good in everywhere but threshold at this point. And then we have Dina and Gray, who I would say are a very similar boat. Both are decently generic, but not as strong and generically in those contexts. So, like, Dina is really good in Aurora and Terror. Doesn't really work in Doki. And even in Aurora and Terror, she's just not as strong as some of the units over here, who are also only good on 2 pieces of content, but they're so much stronger than that piece of content. So that's why I put them over here. And then we have Trondot. Trondot's a little bit specific. So that's why she's farther to the right. She's really good for dispelling if you don't have like a Heinrich, or like an Obel. So if you're using her, you pretty much play her in Terror and Aurora as your dispeller. The problem, she can never dispel in turn 1. So for Aurora, you have to dispel turn 2, which will make characters like Dina not just effectively waste their S3 all the time, which is unfortunate, but there's nothing you can really do about it. Currently, you can't choose the order of skills your characters use in auto. So if you're playing Duranda, you're just going to be wasting debuffs turn 1 in like Aurora. So it's unfortunate, but she's still really good for Aurora. So I would definitely, if you have her and you don't have a Heinrich, she's probably the best dispeller other than a Viper. But Viper's annoying because he's so slow. Building him to be your fastest unit is going to be torture. So I wouldn't really recommend doing that, but he is very good if you want to. It's just really, really annoying to invest that much in a character that's not that great. But he is the best option for him. And then we have Mio. Mio is like very generically, not mid, but like slightly above mid. Like, she's very generically decent. So that's why I put her over here. She is like, generic wise, she should probably go farther left, but she's just like generically not the greatest. Like, she's decent. She's greatest in Doki Doki and PvP, 100%. So for threshold farming, she's really only used in Doki Doki, but can be used everywhere. It's just like you can't freeze other bosses and stuff, so it's like there's not as much of a point, but she does still turn meter manipulation, so it's decent. Lilith is, these three over here are just Doki Doki CCers. Lilith is probably the worst of the three, but she is less specific than the two because she can be used in other content. But she's really just for Doki Doki like these three. In other places she's not used as much, but the other two are pretty much never used outside of Doki Doki. But Kazuyo and Kraken are just Doki Doki CCers. Kazuyo's generally speaking the better one because she can more consistently CC, and she provides attack down, so even if you wake up as sleeped units, they're not going to do as much damage. So very nice. Kraken's also good because of the defense shred, so if you don't have a defense shredder, he's very nice. But yeah, that's going to be for supports and debuffers. And next up we have sustainers. Before I get into this, sustainers are very, very generalized. So you could generally, as you look, they're pretty much the same across the board with some slight alterations, and this is just who's best. You can realistically use them all anywhere when they're not elemental disadvantaged. But these are the best ones for this. So in general, personally, before I say this, I would just recommend using Sonya for the first week, and then just transitioning to Lingluo and keep your Sonya however it was, but not invest it too highly, since she's great. Sonya's great in all content except Aurora, so you can just use her for everywhere. And then once you hit set day 7, you swap to Lingluo, build her up like crazy, and then just use her for Aurora and Sonya for everything else. Or Sonya for Terramaton specifically, because that's where Lingluo is worse. Sorry. But I will go into specifically other characters. But that is generally my personal take, because it is just going to allow you to save the most materials and be the most generically good for your account. But some other characters that are like still strong. We have Valerian, who's good in Doki Doki and Terramaton. For her, she provides shields, but she doesn't provide nearly as much healing. So it's a lot harder to sustain with her, but she does provide a random attack buff, sometimes with her S3. So it is strong, but it's just going to be a lot. You're going to not be able to push as hard as content because you're sustaining less. So unless you're like doing one-shot teams or just very, very high damage, in general, unless you have elemental disadvantage, I would argue Sonya is probably better, but they can both work. And for Terramaton specifically, we have some three other units that are not in these. Two other units that are not in the other two categories: Hellkid and Chiaki. Hellkid's a little unique. His damage is really good, but he cannot really solo sustain for a long period. He can solo sustain temporarily with his S3, but it will fall off in Terramaton because the boss just does so much damage. So for him, you have to be able to clear really fast to use him. But if you can clear really fast, he's the best sustain because he does so much damage. So if you have him, in my opinion, he's more of an endgame unit because you use him to just clear it quicker. It's the only reason, in my opinion. Otherwise, you'd be better off just playing Sonya, like in general. Otherwise, we have Chiaki right here. The reason she's decent here and not the other places is because she applies damage reduction. And damage reduction is really nice in Terror to prevent your units from getting one-tapped and giving the boss an extra turn. So she's really good for that. Preventing the one-tap is really nice and allows you to clear content harder, but it does heal less than like a Sonya. And also doesn't cleanse. And then last up, we're going to talk about Aurora. So for Aurora, there really is just one unit, sort of two units for this. So personally, I would recommend everyone gets Lingluo day 7. I wouldn't really farm Aurora till day 7, and once you hit day 7 with Lingluo, just fully invest in our user. You can use Mia, but it's worse than everyone has a Lingluo. So personally, just use Lingluo, but if you really want, you can use Mia for this because she has a Dispel. That's really the only reason to play per player. She sustains decently, but you need to have a lot of healing, so it's really hard to get as much healing from her as Lingluo for the Aurora. I think it's called Curse Shield is the debuff, but yeah. They both can work, and Mia does have the Dispel, so if you don't have a Dispeller, she can't really do it solo, but I've heard there are teams where she can work, so that's why she's here. She is still good here. But yeah, that's going to do it for all the characters. So with all of that in mind, with those units that you have for each category, just deciding a team should become a lot easier for each threshold and whatever you would best for your account. So just to give an example real quick, let's say the 5-star units you have on your account, let's say you pulled a Shiata, Kloss, and Doki Doki from your account. So the Doki Doki can be used to manage anywhere, so that can slot onto any threshold. Let's say you have a Kloss on your account, that can be used everywhere but Aurora. And then if you got a Shiata, she can be used in primarily Doki Doki, but can work on Aurora. So if you're in that boat, I would definitely farm Doki Doki. Like that is a great, those 3 characters would definitely allow you to farm Doki Doki the easiest. But most people are going to have more SSRs. So if you have, like, let's say on the top of that, let's say if you have a Rosa too, you can also farm Aurora. Because granted your class isn't going to be usable there, you can just use your Doki Doki and your Rosa there, and then SR units can fill in the gaps for the other characters. Like for an Aurora team, let's say you had that Rosa plus Doki Doki plus Kloss. If you have those 2 units, you can just put SRs and other shots. Like let's say you can play a Dina, you can play a Tyrandot, you can use a Lingluo for the sustain because everyone has her. So just stuff like that. Like that's why this is helpful in my opinion. Going through what you have, going through what you need and what you want based on your goals and whatnot, that's how you can decide what characters and what to farm. So with all that in mind, it should be a lot easier in deciding what content makes the most sense to farm for your account. But if any of you guys still have questions on things, what to do, or what you think I should have mentioned, please let me know in the comments. It'd be very, very helpful. But yeah, that's going to do it for today's video. Thanks so much for watching, and it would really help me out if you could like and subscribe. But that's it. Peace and goodbye.